Bien. Bonsoir,
Good evening
à tous.
to you all
Ceux qui sont venus.
who have come here this evening.
En ce moment
At this
tragique de l'histoire,
tragic moment of history,
nous sommes heureux d'accueillir
we are happy
la délégation
to
ukrainienne
have
parmi nous,
here a Ukrainian delegation headed by Natalia Vitrenko,
qui est la présidente du Parti
the leader of the Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine.
socialiste progressiste ukrainien, qui se bat pour une véritable indépendance.
She has been fighting for a genuine independence and true social justice in Ukraine, which has been impoverished and destroyed for 30 years.
Aujourd'hui, c'est une opération
Today, we are witnessing an operation which can be called Western, but in fact is being done by American and British services and their accomplices to destabilize Ukraine, making it a trigger against Russia on the one side, and on the other, to make a grab for what Halford Mackinder and other British geopoliticians called the Central Island. That is a destabilization in view of what Zbigniew Brzezinski has called a Russian resurgence. And thus we have an offensive launched by this grouping of Western powers with certain factions in the United States and Britain who are ready to go right to the brink of a thermonuclear war. And on the other side, there is resistance from Russia, which also is capable of showing its nuclear and thermonuclear teeth. And thus we have a very serious crisis situation. Natalia herself has been fighting for over 20 years to prevent this crisis from coming to pass, but here we are. And while she has been attacked from many sides, Natalia Vitrenko today represents the spirit of independence for her country, which should join our own. And she is accompanied in her delegation by Colonel Valery Sergachov, who heads the Kiev Rus Party.
Le Parti des Slaves orientaux de Kiev, c'est-à-dire quelque chose qui est un mouvement d'origine.
This is a movement which stands for a united Ukraine as against one partitioned by ethnic or other factors. Also in the delegation is Vladimir Romanovich Marchenko, who heads a trade union organization called the Ukrainian Confederation of Labor and has been fighting for a long time also on the front for the independence and freedom of his country. Natalia herself has been a member of the National Parliament twice, and Mr. Marchenko, who has been fighting with her, also several times. These are therefore people who know Ukrainian politics very well and have been involved in political battles for a long time. Natalia Vitrenko ran for the presidency. The first time she got 11% of the votes, the second time only 1.5%, while she was under attack from all sides. And the last time she was unable to raise the 100,000 euros required to enter the race. In a country where the oligarchs count things in billions, maybe 100,000 euros seems like nothing, but the fact that she couldn't pull it together is a reflection of her independence, and I would say of the honesty she represents, and I give her the floor. I am very glad to greet you, and I know that we are being watched and listened to by millions of people around the world. On January 25th of this year, 29 leaders of Ukrainian political parties and organizations met in Kiev. We wrote an appeal to the General Secretary of the UN, the leaders of European organizations, including the President of the EU, the Chairman of the European Parliament, and other leaders, and we addressed it to U.S. President Obama, to the leaders of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Among us were representatives of 4 different political parties and 10 people who have been members of parliament at the national level. We stated, first of all, that the claim that the people of Ukraine want to sign an association agreement with the European Union is a lie. The Ukrainian people do not want this. Secondly, we said that it is a lie that what is going on in Independence Square, the Maidan, is a peaceful demonstration, is a lie. Guerrillas are in charge of the Maidan. Those guerrillas are neo-Nazis. Third, we said that the will of the majority of the population in Ukraine is being grossly flouted because that majority favors increased integration with Russia and does not want Nazism in Ukraine. And although we represent significant political forces, we are blocked from the media. We appealed to these European and American organizations to invite us to Europe, saying that we're not in power in Ukraine today, and we're also not neo-Nazis, and that we would tell you the truth. These bodies did not invite us, but we did receive invitations from the Paris Academy of Geopolitics, from the Schiller Institute, and from organizations in Italy, for which we are grateful. We are making this tour, therefore, as representatives of people's diplomacy, representing the majority of the population of Ukraine who want to stop the flames of civil war. And we know with certainty that the coup d'etat in Ukraine threatens the stability of the Eurasian continent. Our delegation includes people of various professions. I am an economist, a doctor of economic sciences. Valery Sergachev, my colleague, in that he is also the head of a party, is a retired colonel, a combat officer. The deputy leader of my party, Volodymyr Marchenko, is an engineer, an industrial designer. And therefore, we are well aware of what Ukraine's real potential is and what prospects our country has in the event of integration with the European Union or with the Eurasian Union. First of all, Ukraine has never been offered membership in the EU, is not being offered it, and will never be offered such membership because the EU would sooner disintegrate than to admit Ukraine as a member. The members of the customs union, on the other hand, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia, are our long-term and reliable partners. Ukraine's integration into the customs union can provide an impulse for the economic recovery of Ukraine. But the Ukrainian oligarchs, and that's who has been determining our country's policy, have long ago integrated themselves into the EU. For example, the wealthiest man in Ukraine, the billionaire Rinat Akhmetov, bought a fancy house for himself in London for £40 million sterling. He already owns companies in both the USA and in EU countries. The Ukrainian oligarchies' children study in European countries. They go to Europe for medical care. They take their vacations here. They keep their money in the banks of the City of London and offshore zones. Therefore, they are oriented toward Europe and the West. And it was in order to defend their money that they wanted to sign the association agreement. This agreement would have completely destroyed machine building in Ukraine and dealt a serious blow to industrial production and to agriculture. The agreement would have required Ukraine immediately to open up its domestic markets, with import tariffs being lifted on 72% of all products. The output of Ukrainian industrial companies today is not competitive in the European market. Our Academy of Sciences calculated that the cost of compliance with EU standards would be 160 billion euros. This is equivalent to the national budget of Ukraine for 4 years. We do not have that kind of money, and in other words, Ukraine would have been condemned to the bankruptcy of industrial enterprises, total economic collapse, and mass unemployment. In addition, the agreement prescribed that all of this would be presided over by supranational organizations, the Association Council and a trade committee. Thus, Ukraine would have lost both its state sovereignty and economic sovereignty. The agreement also provides that Ukraine, upon signing it, would enter into a common security and defense policy. This means political convergence. This means pushing Ukraine into NATO. From both the economic and military standpoints, this would have been a blow against Russian interests. Calculations done by a joint task force of the Russian and Ukrainian Academies of Science showed that integration with the customs union, however, would be economically beneficial for Ukraine. In addition, it is the case that historically, in its outlook, Ukraine is oriented toward Russia. We are one people. We are the people of Rus. An ancient Russian state was formed. 1150 years ago, its initial capital was in Novgorod. Later, the capital was in Kiev. After the period of the Tatar-Mongol invasion, Moscow became the capital. And altogether, we were called Rus. There was Little Russia, White Russia, South Russia, Great Russia. Ukraine, as such, was artificially created under the Austro-Hungarian Empire in order to tear away a chunk of territory from Russia, because 336 years ago there had been a unification of Great and Little Russia. And it was only in 1922 that Ukraine appeared as a nation-state under that name. Therefore, in economic terms, world outlook, and genetically, the majority of the Ukrainian population is oriented towards Russia. Let me read you some data published in the journal Obozrenie by the deputy head of the Institute of Sociology of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, Nikolai Shulga. This is the most respected sociological research done in Ukraine. They asked people what foreign policy orientation they would prefer Ukraine to have. 54% of the population replied in favor of developing relations with Russia and building up an Eastern alliance. In favor of relations with the developed countries of the West, 15%. People were asked how they viewed the prospect of Ukraine joining a union with Russia and Belarus. 59% favored this, 21% were against. The figures were clearly differentiated by region. In Western Ukraine, 16% were in favor of the idea of union with Russia and Belarus, but in Eastern Ukraine, 84% of the population favored this. The national average was 59% in favor. That poll was in 2011. After Yanukovych came to power in 2010, there was a dawn to dusk campaign throughout Ukraine for integration with the EU. It was hammered into people's heads that once the association agreement were signed, there would be jobs for everyone, wages like in France, pensions like in Germany, and everything would be terrific. Therefore, 2 years later, in May 2013, the figures showing the orientation of our population had changed somewhat. In favor of alliance with Russia and Belarus was 49%, 28% against, 22% undecided. But if we split the undecided in half, then the result is that still 60% of the Ukrainian population is oriented towards union with Russia and Belarus. But the Ukrainian oligarchs and Yanukovych were preparing to sign the association agreement on November 29th in Vilnius. Suddenly, 1 week before it was to be signed, the Ukrainian government decided to halt the process and not sign. And indeed, on November 29th, 2013, Yanukovych refrained from signing the agreement. But the minute the whistle then sounded immediately, and the parliamentary opposition summoned people to a Euromaidan protest to pressure the government on this issue. And indeed, several thousand people, several tens of thousands, poured into Independence Square in Kiev, and they demanded signing the association with the EU. The majority of these people simply had no idea of what awaited Ukraine were it to sign, because it was only in January of 2014 that this diagram appeared on the government website. It shows that if Ukraine signed the agreement with the EU, in 2014, Ukraine would lose $36.9 billion, whereas if it didn't sign, but rather build up its relations with Russia, it would gain $5.1 billion this year. But by then, nobody was listening, because on the night of November 29th to 30th, 2013, somebody in the presidential administration organized a provocation, and the Maidan ceased to be peaceful. What was the provocation? The organizers of the Maidan announced that the demonstration was over. They began to take down the stage and remove the sound system. Only 300 to 400 people remained in the square, primarily youth. And at 4 a.m., 1,000 people from the Berkut Special Police Force showed up in the square. And the Berkut, rather than merely pushing people out of the square, started brutally beating them. Now, at 4 a.m., quite a number of TV channels happened to have crews in the square, and the videos they filmed were then shown not only in Ukraine, but through CNN and others all over the world, to demonstrate how the Ukrainian authorities were dealing with a peaceful demonstration. The next day, tens of thousands of people from various regions of Ukraine, chiefly the western part, streamed into the city. And as of December 1st, the neo-Nazis took the lead within the demonstration. They brought in well-trained guerrillas who began to do battle with law enforcement. The neo-Nazis did not appear out of nowhere in Ukraine on December 1st, but much earlier. At the end of World War II, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN, these collaborationists, were taken under the wing of the U.S. CIA. And the minute Ukraine became independent in 1991, their organizations were legalized inside Ukraine. President Yushchenko, in particular, did a lot to promote the growth of the neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine. President Yanukovych not only did not cancel the pro-Nazi decrees of Yushchenko, but also continued the same line. And the question arises, why? Well, the Party of Regions, headed by Yanukovych, is not a party with an ideology. It is a business corporation which uses banditry to enhance its own wealth in every way possible. U.S. support has been very important for them. Under both Yushchenko and Yanukovych, the United States did everything it could to develop the neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine. I filed suit against the presidency demanding the repeal of the Nazi decrees. I went through all the levels of court in Ukraine and beyond, up to the European Court. They all ruled on political grounds rather than the law, and contrary to the standards set by the Nuremberg Tribunal, to UN resolutions, to the Durban Declaration, to the European conventions, they approved honoring Nazi collaborationists as heroes of Ukraine who had fought for the liberation of our country. The National Socialist ideology and its idols, such as Bandera, Shukhevych, Konovalets, have all surfaced at the Maidan. Let's look at the video to show what Nazis in the Ukraine look like. This is the right sector, so-called. Pravy Sektor, now carrying out a torch march. You need to hear their slogans in a moment, which say, "Glory to the nation, death to the enemies."
Их лозунги: слава нации, смерть врагам. Переведи. Слава нации.
This is in Kiev, January 1st, 2014.
Alors ils font ce marche de flambeau. Alors ce sont des exercices militaires sur le Maïdan.
Here they are training on the Maidan. They are well equipped.
Ils sont bien équipés.
This is the leader of the Svoboda party, Tyagnybok. Here they are in.
Ils sont bien traînés pour se battre.
They are well trained in fighting. They're practicing in Kiev at the Maidan. The sign said right sector. They are always masked.
Alors, Pravy Sektor, c'est une association de quelques organisations nationalistes extrêmes.
Right sector is a grouping of several right-wing nationalist movements. Here they are toppling a monument to Lenin. On Khreshchatyk Street, they are here in Kiev. And here you have them throwing Molotov cocktails at law enforcement.
Forces de l'ordre, vous pouvez voir ça très clair, ce qui se passe.
These are their insignia.
Ce sont des symboles de ces organisations de nazis qui...
This is the leader of Right Sector, Dmytro Yarosh. Again, a torch march. And this is what's called a peaceful demonstration. And the European politicians come and they see the posters of the Abwehr agents, Bandera and Shukhevych. Tyagnybok again. Here they are tearing up the flag of the Party of Regions. They are shouting, "Knife the Moskali," which means Russians, "hang the communists." Their greetings are like those of the Nazis. In place of Sieg Heil, they shout, "Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava," which means glory to Ukraine, to the hero's glory.
Alors, ils ont le slogan comme les nazis de l'Allemagne avaient un slogan Sieg Heil, les nazis de l'Ukraine, ils crient.
Here you have the swastika on their armbands.
La gloire aux héros.
Look at those chains. Later they came with weapons, with guns. They did not appear by accident or out of nowhere or suddenly. This has been prepared over a long period of time as a force for carrying out a coup. Let's go to the next video. As you saw, their swastika graffiti are all over Krещатик. On Krещатик Street, there are portraits of Bandera. Here you have December 1st by the presidential administration with this peaceful demonstration, so-called. Here are the policemen behind the shields standing unarmed. Again, this is the demonstrators, organized units attacking the police in the area of the presidential administration building on December 1st, 2013.
Et on vit que ça monte, la tension monte maintenant. C'est cocktail Molotov déjà, il y a les bâtons.
They're using both cudgels and Molotov cocktails.
C'est à côté de l'administration du président.
Again, by the presidential administration headquarters. On December 1st, the whole world could see that there were terrorist guerrillas in the streets of Kiev. But the EU said, no, this is a peaceful demonstration. These neo-Nazi guerrillas began to seize buildings: the Kiev City Hall, the Trade Union's House, the Ministry of Agriculture, the October Palace of Culture. Then they broke into the Ministry of Energy, and it was only there that the Minister of Energy said that there was a danger to the 15 nuclear reactors in Ukraine, and he drove them out of the ministry building. Central Kiev was totally blockaded, but Yanukovych was conducting negotiations with the opposition. Former European Parliament President Cox and former Polish President Kwasniewski came 27 times. Senator McCain from the United States, Assistant Secretary of State Nuland, Catherine Ashton, a great number of other European officials came to Kiev, and they did not notice any guerrillas or neo-Nazis. They demanded that the government pursue only a peaceful solution. But on January 15th, Zbigniew Brzezinski gave an interview saying that the Maidan should not stop but must go forward. Then, on January 19th, there was a new wave of aggression. The police, the Berkut, were just standing there, standing guard around the government quarter, making no moves, not touching the Maidan. But the neo-Nazi guerrillas came out of the Maidan to attack the government quarter. And now we'll look at the rest of the video. This is January 19th, and the EU said, these are not terrorists or guerrillas, these are Euromaidan activists. Each time the actions are more aggressive. On January 19th, you have them throwing Molotov cocktails at the police, setting them on fire. What you're seeing here is how the Euromaidan defends European values. And here you have February 18th. They said they were going on a peaceful march to the Supreme Rada. During all this time, the EU was telling Yanukovych not to introduce a state of emergency. Out of 20,000 people in the Euromaidan, there were 2,000 hardcore neo-Nazis. This again is outside the Rada on the 18th of February, 2 days later, on yes, out. Yes, that again, out of 20,000 demonstrators in this period, 2,000 of these hardcore groups, neo-Nazi groups. And on this February 18th demonstration, they announced beforehand that they were doing a peaceful march by the Rada, this parliament. 2 days later, on February 20th, they came to the Supreme Rada with guns.
Le Parlement d'assaut avec des armes de feu déjà.
In the interim, military depots and police stockpiles of guns had been seized.
Des dépôts d'armées. Ils ont pris des armes de feu.
Now, it is estimated that there are as many as 25,000 armed bandits in Kiev and throughout Ukraine. They have destroyed over 200 offices of the Party of Regions, shooting several office employees in the course of that. They have burned offices of the Communist Party. I am also the leader of a political party, and although I have my own attitude towards the government, we do not support neo-Nazism. What can our party expect if these people are in power? The neo-Nazis terrorized the parliament, and on February 20th, they essentially reformatted the parliament. On February 21st, they signed an agreement with Yanukovych, and that is 3 leaders of the opposition, Klitschko, Yatsenyuk, and Technibok. The agreement was witnessed by representatives of 3 foreign ministers of EU countries. Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier of Germany,
Frank-Walter Steinmeier, c'est le ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'Allemagne.
Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski of Poland, and the head of the Continental Europe Department of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Eric Fournier. This was a monstrous agreement. I never imagined that the European Union could flout the norms of law in such a way. Ukraine has a constitution. Section 13 of that constitution spells out the procedure for amending the constitution. Yet the first point of this February 21st agreement demanded that amendments to the constitution be adopted and announced within 48 hours, including a change in our state system. The constitution requires a vote by 2/3 constitutional majority, 2/3 vote, in 2 consecutive sessions, followed by review and approval by the Constitutional Court. The agreement contained not one word about dispersing the Maidan and disarming the guerrillas so that the parliament might vote in peace. Thus, by aiming pistol barrels at members of parliament, beating them up, and intimidating them with potential repercussions against their families, they forced the Supreme Rada to convene on February 20th and start to vote. They voted to change the Constitution. The procedure for impeachment is spelled out in the Constitution, but the Parliament spat on that and simply voted, declared that Yanukovych had resigned, and set elections for May 25th. The agreement forbids declaration of a state of emergency. The agreement agrees that violence should. The agreement decrees that violence should cease. And immediately the Berkut and the police were ordered. No use of force, no resistance. Meanwhile, the guerrillas were shooting at them. In the space of these 3 months, the parliament has passed 3 amnesty laws. Back in 1999, when I was running for president of Ukraine, there was an attack with 2 grenades thrown at me and my entourage. 44 people were wounded, including myself and Vladimir Marchenko. The organizer of this attack was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 15 years. After 5 years, he was released, and just now, he took part in the latest events. He was arrested when he and his buddies attempted to seize the city hall in the city of Kryvyi Rog in Dnipropetrovsk region. 18 bottles of Molotov cocktails were found in his car. He was detained, but under the amnesty, he has now been released again. Now, the organizers and the guerrillas of the Maidan are shaping the entire government of Ukraine. We can see from the program of the Svoboda Party what kind of government this will be. This is a neo-Nazi party which does not conceal that it continues to implement the ideology of the National Socialists. The European Parliament, in resolutions passed in 2010 and 2012, condemned any support for this party. Now it appears that the head of this party, or an official of this party, will become First Deputy Prime Minister. Look at the Svoboda Party program. It calls for ending Ukraine's participation in any international groups of countries initiated by Moscow, impose visa requirements for travel to and from Russia, restore Ukraine's status as a nuclear power, demand from NATO member countries favorable conditions for Ukraine to join NATO. They have a special chapter on Crimea, which calls for changing the status of Crimea from an autonomous republic to merely a region, and to end the special status of the city of Sevastopol. So I ask you, what use does the EU have for Nazis in power in Ukraine? Is it not understood that civil war in Ukraine will develop more and more? There are 15 nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Ukraine has the largest natural gas pipeline network in Europe, dozens of large chemical plants. What does it mean to have a civil war in the vicinity of industrial facilities like these? The Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet is based at Sevastopol. Russia gave the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine 60 years ago in token of friendship. Do Catherine Ashton, Füle, and the others really not realize that this neo-Nazi regime will provoke a conflict with Russia? Do the EU officials really not understand that Ukraine will be completely bankrupt and that millions of Ukrainians will become refugees, pouring into Europe in search of work? What must be done? Moscow, Berlin, and Paris should immediately unite their efforts to stop neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Don't wait for Washington. Adopt a decision on early parliamentary elections in Ukraine, but first, disperse the Maidan and disarm all the guerrillas. And in accordance with the standards of international law, ban neo-Nazi parties and movements in Ukraine. Only then will there be a free expression of the will of the citizens of Ukraine and the formation of a normal parliament. Without question, new presidential elections are needed because Yanukovych is a scoundrel who has no right to hold any political office in Ukraine. But if presidential elections are held on the Maidan's terms and under a dictatorship of right sector, then Ukraine will get a Führer. And then with a neo-Nazi parliament and a neo-Nazi government, the creation of a neo-Nazi state in the central of Europe will have been completed. These are our evaluations, and I thank you for being so attentive. If you have any questions, we welcome them. I would like to give Mr. Marchenko and Colonel Sergachev the opportunity to add some remarks if they would like to. Do you have something to add? This is Volodymyr Marchenko, a former member of the National Parliament of Ukraine, who was a member of the Constitutional Commission thereof. I would like to draw your attention to the precedent brought about by the USA and the EU officials regarding Ukraine. The essence of the matter is that the EU has proclaimed its principles and its values, including the defense of human rights, the defense of minority rights, democracy, free elections, and non-acceptance of Nazism. These standards have guided the European Court of Human Rights in implementing the provisions of the European conventions. These values are the calling card of the EU around the world. But with regard to Ukraine, the EU officials have violated all of these declared principles and values. In the Maidan, the neo-Nazis declared a national revolution. Their slogans proclaim Ukraine for Ukrainians, glory to the nation, death to the enemies. But the EU officials maintain that the Maidan is defending European values. Today, the new authorities proclaimed that the only people considered part of the Ukrainian nation will be those who speak Ukrainian. And beyond any doubt, there is going to be forced assimilation of ethnic minorities. Today, the new parliament repealed the law on language policy, which defined the procedure for the languages of ethnic minorities to obtain official status on the regional level.
Avait le statut spécial de certaines régions où la plupart des populations.
This applied to certain regions where the majority of the population speaks Russian. Today, this law has stripped Russian of its special status in Ukraine, including in areas where the majority speaks Russian. In western Ukraine, some 6 or 7 years ago, it was banned even to speak Russian on public transportation. Now these processes will be generalized to Ukraine as a whole. There were some reports that Irina Farion of the Svoboda Party was being proposed as Minister of Education in the new government. She is the teacher who forbid a schoolgirl to use her own name in school because it was a Russian name. Another problem is that European values are supposed to include the rule of law. Natalia Vitrenko showed you that the agreement witnessed by the 3 foreign ministers included a demand to change the constitution and alter the state system of Ukraine in the space of 48 hours, and they did so. They changed the constitutional system illegally, shifting from a presidential to a parliamentary republic, violating the supremacy of law, the priority of the constitution within the system of democratic law. President Yanukovych was illegally stripped of his authority. The European Parliament, European officials, has termed as peaceful demonstrators guerrillas with weapons in hand who were shooting civilians, shooting at electric bodies, seizing government buildings, seizing weapons depots. By supporting the Ukrainian Euromaidan as a repository of European values, the EU have recognized as European values the swastika, the collaborationists like Bandera and Shukhevich and their practices. This means that the precedent of support for neo-Nazis, terrorists, and guerrillas in Ukraine may be spread to other countries in Europe, to EU member countries. Lastly, the EU has blessed the accession to power of neo-Nazis who have already publicly declared Russia to be a hostile state. Russia and Ukraine are bound by a treaty of friendship and partnership, and I think that the new neo-Nazi Ukrainian regime will abrogate this treaty. But even without that, a hotbed of tension has been created on the Eurasian continent, and the question of how to put it out is a big problem for those who have supported the Euromaidan and made out such values as were expressed there to be a so-called peaceful demonstration. Now we have Colonel Valery Sergachev, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, and he is the leader of the Kiev Rus party. And he was a member of the Odessa regional parliament in Odessa. I would like to underscore that there are in Ukraine 134 ethnic groups. Where are people supposed to flee? Poland and Romania have declared that they are prepared to accept refugees. Romania, meanwhile, for the past 5 or 7 years, has been voicing territorial ambitions regarding land in the Odessa region and Bukovina, which they call Bessarabia. Claims on Crimea have already appeared in the Turkish press. The nationalists say that the territory of Ukraine extends from Lviv all the way to the Don River, that is, deep into Russia. I would like to underscore once again that there are 15 nuclear reactors in Ukraine. That's 15 Chernobyls. This creates the potential for a military conflict that could spill over into World War III. Thank you.